You ask why motivation vanishes after a so-called spiritual awakening. You expect fire, don't you? Enlightenment, bliss, a surge of purpose. But what comes instead is collapse. Not the romantic, noble kind, no. It is quiet, clinical, and merciless. Like waking up in a theater after the final curtain has fallen. The crowd is gone. The actors have left. The lights are cold. And all that's left is you, sitting there, unsure why you ever applauded. The collapse of illusions is not a poetic transformation. It is a psychological dismembering. What you once called motivation was not yours. It was inherited, installed, handed down like a worn-out coat. Be somebody, do something. Prove your worth, become more. That noise was never your voice. It was the humming of a machine school, society, culture convincing you that running harder would eventually get you somewhere meaningful. But when you awaken, you see it clearly for the first time. There is no destination, there never was, only the repetition of becoming. This clarity is not euphoric, it is surgical. You don't feel liberated, you are simply no longer possessed. The promises that once dragged you forward, wealth, fame, legacy, even inner peace, dissolve like fog under the scrutiny of awakened eyes. You no longer chase them, not because you are lazy, but because you finally see that they were mirages built on the shifting sands of fear and fantasy. And without those illusions, the engines die. The whole infrastructure of motivation was built around those myths. Remove them and you're left with silence, stillness, a vast internal desert, not lifeless, just unpopulated. And it's terrifying at first because you mistake that silence for failure. You think something's wrong with you, but nothing is wrong. You have simply exited the carnival. Most people don't want to leave the carnival. They want to paint over the ride with spiritual quotes and call that awakening. But to truly see is to walk behind the curtain and witness the machinery, the old gears, the worn levers, the absurdity of it all. And once you've seen it, how do you return to pretending? You can't. And that's why motivation dies. Not because you are broken, but because the game is. You see now that the chase was always the trap. You understand why you never felt fulfilled, even when you succeeded. You realize that every version of your former self, the ambitious one, the hopeful one, the relentless one, was just a mask worn by fear, by longing, by a desperate attempt to feel real. And now that the masks have fallen, what's left is something raw, quiet, possibly truer than anything before. But it does not speak the language of goals or grind. It doesn't care for performance. It sits in the ruins of illusion and waits for honesty to grow. So if you feel like you've lost your motivation after awakening, good. That means the anesthesia has worn off. You're not failing to chase. You're finally refusing to run in circles. Let that discomfort teach you. Let that stillness provoke you. Because what comes after the collapse is not emptiness. It's the possibility of living without lies. After the illusions collapse, something unexpected happens, not a newfound clarity, not a burst of inspiration, but a kind of vacancy. Not depression in the clinical sense, though it might look like that from the outside. No, this is different. It's the quiet erosion of purpose. You feel it not like a loss, but like an exposure, like waking up and realizing that the furniture of your inner world was all cardboard, painted convincingly, sturdy enough for a time, but now soggy, dissolving under the weight of your own awareness. Before awakening, you were driven. That drive may have felt noble, even sacred, to improve yourself, to leave a legacy, to be someone worth remembering. But if you trace that drive back to its roots, you'll often find a fear of worthlessness lurking beneath. The fear that if you stop, you disappear. That if you're not constantly doing, building, striving, you become invisible to others, and worse, to yourself. So, you built your identity like scaffolding around goals, dreams, ambitions. You were becoming something, always becoming, but spiritual awakening doesn't reward that scaffolding. It sets fire to it. And what's left? Emptiness, the kind no achievement can patch, the kind that used to terrify you into staying busy. It doesn't go away because you've awakened. In fact, you see it more clearly. Where your drive used to be, there is now space. Not a peaceful, meditative space, but a hollow one. The ache of meaninglessness, the absurdity of repetition, the faint, sick realization that you were chasing yourself in a circle for years, believing there was some final arrival just around the bend. And now you can't pretend anymore. You see how fragile the whole thing was. The rewards were bait, the progress was illusion, the milestones were arbitrary. So what do you do? How do you move forward when the idea of forward no longer compels you? Here's the strange thing. It's not that nothing matters. It's that the old things don't matter anymore, and the new things haven't yet revealed themselves. You are suspended in between identities. The person you were is gone, and the person you're becoming cannot be born through effort, only through surrender. But surrender is not passive. It's a brutal process of unlearning, of resisting the urge to fill the void with noise. And that's what makes it so unbearable for many. The stillness feels like stagnation, the emptiness feels like failure, but in truth it is a sacred pause, a waiting room between the false life and the real one. The silence isn't killing you, it's cleansing you. Most people run from it. They run back to productivity, to goals, to action, because it gives them the illusion of control. But you, if you've really awakened, must stay here in this space. Let the emptiness teach you what you are without effort, without titles, without proof. Because when the need for meaning dissolves, something more honest can finally begin. And maybe the absence of motivation isn't the end of your life, but the start of your first true breath. Clarity is a strange punishment. We speak of it like it's a gift, a higher state of consciousness, something to be sought and celebrated. But the truth is, to see clearly is to be condemned to live without the luxury of comforting lies. The illusions that once gave you energy, direction, even hope, they vanish. You begin to see the world not as it was sold to you, but as it is, repetitive, mechanical, absurd. It's like walking through a city you've lived in all your life, only now every billboard is blank, every advertisement suddenly nonsensical. The faces you pass are still smiling, still engaged in the same rituals, but you can no longer play along. Not because you've become bitter, but because the game no longer fools you. You can't make yourself believe in it, no matter how hard you try. This is not enlightenment in the way people market it, not a glow, not a state of infinite love and inspiration. It's more like an autopsy performed on everything you once held sacred. You wanted to know the truth, now you do, and the truth has no interest in making you feel comfortable. You see the script, the endless loop. People chasing money they won't have time to enjoy, fame that poisons their privacy, love that becomes negotiation. You see it not from above, not as a superior but from the side, as someone who once stood in the same lines, danced to the same music, believed in the same promises. The only difference now is your eyes are open, and that's the problem, because once you've seen the machinery, you can't unsee it. You understand how motivation itself is often just a symptom of delusion, a frantic sprint toward fabricated destinations. Most people aren't truly driven by desire, they're driven by fear, fear of being nothing, fear of missing out, fear of sitting still long enough to hear their own emptiness echo back. So when clarity comes, the fear loses its grip. And with it, the motivation it once fueled. You begin to ask dangerous questions. Why do I want what I want? Who told me that was success? What happens if I stop chasing altogether? These questions don't produce quick answers, they dissolve the questions themselves. And with them, your previous sense of urgency vanishes. You move slower, you speak less, you feel less inclined to prove anything to anyone, even yourself. And to the outside world, it looks like apathy. They don't understand that you're not numb, you're just done pretending. You're not unmotivated, you've simply lost interest in games with no prize. There's no applause for this kind of clarity. No one congratulates you. You don't get followers or medals for seeing the emptiness beneath the surface, but you get something better. You get the opportunity, maybe the burden, to start again, this time from truth. So don't fear the loss of motivation that comes with seeing too clearly. Fear the kind of motivation that keeps you running, even after you've realized the race leads nowhere. One of the more subtle and painful consequences of awakening is a strange kind of exile, not from a place, but from a way of being. You find yourself alienated, not because you chose to leave, but because the world you once belonged to no longer recognizes you. And worse, you no longer recognize it. You see others around you still striving, still racing with conviction, with fire, with plans and strategies and hashtags and vision boards. They talk about goals, about winning, about pushing harder. And you listen, you nod, but there's a growing silence behind your eyes. A kind of distance opens up, quiet at first, then louder in its absence of belonging. It's not superiority. That would be easier. It's disconnection, like watching a play you once starred in, now from backstage, no longer in costume. You know the lines, the timing, the cues, but you no longer believe the story. And when you try to step back on stage, the words catch in your throat. The spotlight burns, the applause feels false, so you retreat, not out of bitterness, but necessity. The old conversations bore you, not because you're enlightened, but because they repeat themselves like broken records, discussions about promotions, followers, image, who's achieving more. Everything revolving around a self that must constantly be updated, curated, and presented like a product. It begins to feel grotesque, the way people cling to their identities like lifeboats, even as they drown inside. You try to speak your truth gently at first. You mention the emptiness of constant becoming, the fatigue of needing to prove one's worth every waking moment. But your words don't land, they confuse. They threaten. People don't want to hear that the ladder they've been climbing may be leaning against a wall that doesn't exist. So they retreat too in their own way, and now you're on the other side of the glass. It's not loneliness in the traditional sense. It's something more existential, a fracture in shared reality. You live among people, yet feel unseen. You walk the same streets, but you're no longer part of the choreography. The music they dance to no longer reaches your ears, and sometimes in quiet moments you wonder if you've lost something essential, if maybe you've stepped too far outside. But here's the paradox. This alienation is proof that the awakening was real. You can't awaken and remain fully inside the old world. The price of seeing clearly is separation, not because you wanted it, but because truth has a cost, and that cost is belonging. So what do? You don't go back. You don't force yourself to fit. Instead, you learn to walk alone with dignity. You find others, not many, but a few, who also carry that quiet, strange clarity. You speak less, but more honestly. You create, not for approval, but from necessity. And you begin, slowly, to build a life that doesn't require performance. In a world that worships noise, your silence becomes a rebellion. And that rebellion, quiet as it may be, is the beginning of true alignment. Perhaps the most disorienting shift after awakening is the collapse of the self, not metaphorically, not in some poetic Instagram quote kind of way. I mean asterisk, literally asterisk, the you. That you spent years cultivating, the personality, the identity, the clever bio, the curated likes and dislikes, all of it begins to unravel. Not dramatically, but disturbingly quietly, like watching paint peel from a wall that used to be familiar. You were taught to treasure your identity, told to develop it, improve it, express it, as if it were something solid, as if the self were a stable structure you could keep refining forever. But awakening rips away that illusion. And suddenly you realize this self you've been working so hard to perfect isn't even real. It's a performance, a placeholder, a mask worn to survive the world's expectations. And now the mask is slipping, not because you're trying to drop it, but because it no longer sticks. And here's where the so-called loss of motivation comes in. Because once the idea of a fixed self dissolves, so does the need to decorate it. Why strive to improve something that doesn't exist in the way you thought it did? Why obsess over achievements, appearances, recognition when the very one who sought them is no longer clearly there? This is not detachment in the romantic sense. It's destabilizing. You feel like a house with no foundation. The roles you used to play, the achiever, the helper, the rebel, the intellectual, they lose their grip. They still show up like ghosts of old behavior, but there's no longer a belief holding them in place. You catch yourself mid-performance and suddenly wonder, asterisk, who is this for? Asterisk, and worse, asterisk, who is this asterisk? The desire to be someone dies, not because you've become enlightened, but because you've realized how artificial the whole process was. The person you were trying to become was a concept stitched together by memory, fear, trauma, and other people's expectations. And now that the thread has unraveled, you're left holding nothing. And yet that nothing is honest, more honest than the self you spent years building. This is where many retreat, back into their roles, back into productivity, back into goals, just to feel like somebody again. Because the alternative, living without a clear self, without a branded identity, feels like death. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some part of you does have to die for something real to begin. You don't need to become someone. You need to learn how to be no one and to stand there, still breathing, still conscious, still capable of love, even when there's nothing left to prove. And if motivation has left you, maybe it's not because you failed. Maybe it's because you're finally waking up from the exhausting job of pretending to be a person you never were. Sometimes what looks like collapse is just the ground making room for truth to stand. There's a peculiar misunderstanding that surrounds the aftermath of awakening. People look at you slower, quieter, less driven, and they assume you've stopped. They call it stagnation. They say you've lost your edge. What they don't see is that the movement has gone inward. The activity is still there, but it no longer obeys the rules of performance. Stillness, to the unawakened mind, is synonymous with failure. In a culture that worships acceleration, anything that doesn't sprint is seen as dead. But after awakening, stillness is not death, it's depth. You are not stopping because you've given up. You're stopping because you're finally listening. It's an unfamiliar rhythm. No external deadlines. No synthetic urgency. No imaginary finish lines. Just you and the silence, and the strange sense that for the first time, life is no longer demanding that you chase it. It's simply asking you to notice it. And that's uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, because it strips you of your usual distractions. There is no status to polish, no future to rush toward, no audience to perform for. What's left is raw presence, and the unfamiliar task of simply existing without justification. You begin to see that most people are addicted not to growth, but to movement. They confuse restlessness with evolution. They think loudness is impact, but you've stepped out of that current, and from where you now stand, you see the chaos not as life, but as noise trying to drown out life. This stillness, the one mistaken for laziness or depression, is not emptiness, it's incubation. It's the space in which something real can finally emerge. But unlike ambition or hunger, this new movement does not arise from lack. It doesn't seek validation, it doesn't beg for applause. It grows quietly, like roots under the surface, building something unshakable. You begin to act again, eventually, but not from fear, not from compulsion. You speak when you truly have something to say. You create not to be seen, but because the act itself is an extension of your inner stillness. You move not to escape, but to express. And this new movement is more precise, more alive, more devastatingly honest than anything that came before. From the outside, people may still call it stagnation. They don't see the architecture forming beneath the surface. They don't see the dismantling of falsehoods, the reconfiguration of identity, the quiet revolt against performative living. But you do, you feel it, and in time that is enough. So if you find yourself in that space slow, stripped of goals, disoriented by stillness, don't rush to escape it. Don't be bullied back into movement. The world will tempt you with momentum, but clarity, integrity, and truth rarely move at that speed. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a collapsing world is not move at all. And in that pause, in that sacred defiance of noise, a more authentic life begins to whisper its first words.